It was supposed to be a normal night in London. Rain tapping softly against the window, the distant hum of traffic, the kind of calm that makes you forget you're thousands of miles from home. But at 11:47 p.m., everything changed. Sarah, an American tourist visiting the UK for the first time, stared at her husband clutching his chest and gasping for air. Her heart started racing. Back in the United States, this moment would come with two fears: the medical emergency and the bill that follows. But this wasn't America. This was the UK. And when she reached for her phone to call an ambulance, she had no idea the biggest shock of the night wasn't the emergency itself, it was what happened after. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. If you've ever wondered what happens when an American in the UK calls 999 for the first time, this story might completely change the way you see healthcare culture shock. Because for many Americans visiting Britain, the ambulance ride isn't just about sirens and flashing lights. It's about confronting everything they thought they knew about medical bills, emergency services, and the NHS versus US healthcare system debate. Sarah's hands were shaking as she dialed 999. Not 911. 999. Even that felt strange. The operator's calm British accent answered almost immediately. Ambulance service. What's the emergency? There was no mention of insurance, no request for a credit card, no warning about out-of-network providers. Just calm, direct questions focused on one thing: saving a life. Now pause for a second. Imagine being conditioned your entire life to associate ambulances with four-figure bills. In America, the average ambulance ride can cost anywhere from $400 to $1,200, and that's before hospital fees. Many Americans hesitate before calling 911 because of cost. Some even take Uber to the ER to avoid medical debt. So when Americans visit the UK and discover how the NHS handles emergency services, the shock isn't small, it's emotional. Within minutes, Sarah heard sirens outside. Paramedics rushed in, professional but reassuring. They checked vitals, administered oxygen, asked detailed questions. And here's where her anxiety peaked, not because of her husband's condition, but because she kept waiting for someone to ask, "How will you be paying for this?" No one did. Instead, one of the paramedics gently explained that they would take him to the nearest A&E department. She hesitated and asked the question that had been sitting like a weight on her chest. How much is this going to cost? The paramedic looked confused for half a second, then gave a small smile. You're visiting? We'll sort that out later if needed. Right now, let's focus on him. That answer alone felt unreal. Here's what shocks many Americans in the UK. NHS ambulance services are publicly funded. For UK residents, calling an ambulance is free at the point of use. No bill handed to you as you're discharged. No invoice arriving weeks later that makes your stomach drop. It's part of the UK's healthcare system, funded by taxes. Now yes, visitors may be charged in some cases depending on circumstances and follow-up treatment. But compared to US emergency medical bills, the cost difference can feel like stepping into an alternate reality. On the ride to the hospital, Sarah kept replaying worst-case scenarios in her mind. In America, an ER visit can easily spiral into thousands of dollars, especially without strong insurance. The fear of medical debt is so real that it changes behavior. Studies have shown Americans often delay care because of cost. So imagine the emotional whiplash of realizing the UK ambulance cost isn't automatically tied to financial panic. When they arrived at A&E, there was another surprise. No receptionist asking for insurance cards before treatment. No clipboard demanding payment details up front. Triage first, treatment first, money later. Now let's be clear, the NHS is not perfect. Waiting times can be long, emergency rooms can be busy. The UK healthcare system has its own pressures and funding challenges. But the cultural shock for Americans isn't about perfection, it's about priorities. In the US healthcare system, billing departments are deeply integrated into the process. In the UK NHS system, the experience feels structurally different. And that difference hits emotionally when you're vulnerable. Hours later, after tests and monitoring, doctors confirmed it wasn't a heart attack, but a severe panic-induced episode. Ironically, stress had triggered the emergency, and part of that stress came from fear of medical costs. When Sarah cautiously asked about payment again before discharge, the staff explained how overseas visitors are assessed. Compared to what she expected, a multi-thousand-dollar nightmare. The reality felt manageable. Almost anticlimactic. And that's when the bigger conversation started. Back at their hotel, Sarah did what most people do after a shocking experience. She went online, Reddit threads, TikTok reactions, YouTube debates about NHS versus US healthcare, and she realized something fascinating. This wasn't rare. Dozens of Americans shared similar stories about calling an ambulance in the UK and bracing for financial disaster, only to experience something completely different. Some described crying in relief. Others felt anger, not at the UK system, but at the realization of how normalized medical debt feels back home. One American student studying abroad said she called 999 for a broken ankle and spent more time worrying about the bill than the injury, until she realized the bill wasn't the monster she imagined. But here's the twist. Not every American reacts the same way. Some are surprised but skeptical. Others argue that higher taxes in the UK mean you're paying indirectly. And that debate opens an entirely different layer of discussion about public healthcare systems versus private insurance models. Still, in moments of crisis, theory fades. Emotion takes over. Picture this. You're in pain, vulnerable, scared. In that moment, what matters most? Speed? Cost? Quality? Access? For Americans shocked after calling an ambulance in the UK, the biggest revelation isn't just the number on a bill, it's the absence of immediate financial interrogation during an emergency. That psychological difference changes how people behave. In the United States, some people hesitate before dialing 911. In the UK, dialing 999 doesn't carry the same financial dread for residents. That contrast is powerful, and it sparks uncomfortable questions. What would happen if Americans didn't fear ambulance costs? Would emergency response statistics look different? Would fewer people delay care? Would medical bankruptcies decrease? Sarah admitted something later that stuck with her. When her husband grabbed his chest, her first instinct wasn't just, help him. It was, can we afford this? Think about that. An emergency shouldn't require a budget calculation. Now again, every system has trade-offs. The NHS faces funding strain and wait time criticism. The US system is praised for cutting-edge technology and rapid specialist access for those insured. This isn't a simple good versus bad story. It's a cultural lens shift. But for Americans visiting the UK, the ambulance experience becomes a moment of reflection. One viral story described an American tourist apologizing repeatedly to UK paramedics for wasting resources, expecting a lecture about cost. Instead, the paramedic replied, "If you think it's an emergency, you call. That's what we're here for." That sentence alone carries weight. And maybe that's why these stories trend online. Because they tap into something deeper than healthcare policy. They tap into security, into fear, into the invisible stress many people carry without realizing it. When Sarah and her husband flew back to the United States weeks later, they found themselves telling everyone about the experience. Not dramatically, not politically, just honestly. "We called an ambulance in the UK," they'd say, "and it wasn't what we expected." The real shock wasn't the sirens. It was the silence where financial panic usually lives. And maybe that's why this topic keeps going viral. Americans shocked after calling an ambulance in the UK isn't just about emergency services. It's about perspective. It's about realizing that systems shape behavior, that fear shapes decisions, that culture shapes expectations. And once you experience something different, you can't unexperience it. So the question isn't just which system is better. The question is, what should an emergency feel like? Because in that London apartment at 11:47 p.m., one American woman learned something she never expected. Sometimes the biggest shock isn't the crisis. It's discovering that help can arrive without a price tag hanging over it. And whether you agree with the NHS model or defend the US healthcare system, one thing is certain. The moment Americans dial 999 for the first time, they're not just calling an ambulance. They're confronting an entirely different philosophy of healthcare. And that changes people. What happened next was even more interesting. When Sarah shared her story online, the comment section exploded. Some Americans were stunned, others were defensive. A few UK viewers jumped in explaining how the NHS is funded through taxes and national insurance. And then the bigger debate started. Is free healthcare UK really free? But here's what stood out most. Dozens of Americans admitted they had avoided calling 911 at least once because of cost fears.